Karoline Leavitt was no stranger to challenges. At just 28 years old, she had already made a name for herself as one of the most fearless journalists in her city. Her articles were known for their depth and honesty, often tackling topics others avoided out of fear or convenience. But nothing could have prepared her for what happened on that fateful morning in Judge Richard Hawthorne's courtroom. The day started like any other, with Karoline arriving early to go over her notes. She wasn't there as a reporter this time. Instead, she had been called as a witness in a minor civil case involving property disputes. It seemed routine enough, but little did she know, events would spiral into something far beyond ordinary. The courtroom buzzed with its usual energy, lawyers whispering strategies, clerks shuffling papers, and observers chatting quietly in the back rows. When Judge Hawthorne entered, everyone rose respectfully, including Karoline. He was a tall man with sharp features and an intimidating presence, someone who commanded authority without even trying. As he took his seat behind the bench, his eyes scanned the room until they landed on Karoline. For a brief moment, his expression remained neutral, but then something flickered, a mix of recognition and irritation. Karoline felt a chill run down her spine. She had recently published an explosive investigative piece exposing corruption within the judicial system, naming Judge Hawthorne as one of the central figures involved in bribery schemes. Though she hadn't expected immediate repercussions, she knew he wouldn't be happy about it. As the hearing progressed, Judge Hawthorne grew increasingly agitated. At first it was subtle. His tone became sharper when addressing lawyers, and he interrupted more frequently than usual. Then, seemingly unable to contain himself any longer, he turned his attention directly toward Karoline. "Miss Leavitt," he barked, his voice echoing through the otherwise quiet courtroom. "You seem rather comfortable sitting there, don't you?" The suddenness of his words caught everyone off guard, and all eyes shifted to Karoline. She sat upright, her face calm despite the tension building inside her. "I'm here because I was summoned, Your Honor," she replied politely, choosing her words carefully. Judge Hawthorne didn't stop there. His anger boiled over, and he launched into a tirade, accusing Karoline of spreading lies and tarnishing reputations. "You think you're some kind of crusader for justice? All you do is stir up trouble where none exists," he snapped, slamming his gavel down hard enough to startle those closest to him. People exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether they should intervene or simply stay silent. Karoline kept her composure, though her hands clenched tightly under the table. She understood that responding emotionally would only give him more ammunition, so she remained quiet, letting his rant play out. Minutes passed, and just when it seemed things couldn't get worse, a bailiff entered the courtroom holding a sealed envelope marked urgent. He approached the judge cautiously, handing it over without saying a word. Judge Hawthorne hesitated before opening it, his brow furrowing as he scanned the contents. His face paled visibly, and for a moment, he looked like a man who had just seen his worst nightmare come true. Before anyone could react, two uniformed officers walked in, their expressions stern and purposeful. They moved straight toward the bench, ignoring the murmurs rippling through the crowd. One of them spoke loud and clear. "Richard Hawthorne, you are under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, and obstruction of justice." The room erupted in chaos. Gasps filled the air as people struggled to comprehend what was happening right in front of them. Lawyers whispered urgently to each other while spectators craned their necks to get a better view. Cameras flashed as reporters captured every second of the unfolding drama. Judge Hawthorne, still seated, looked utterly stunned, his earlier bravado replaced by sheer disbelief. As the officers placed handcuffs on him, he tried to protest, but his words were drowned out by the commotion. Karoline watched silently, her mind racing. She hadn't anticipated such immediate consequences from her exposé, yet here they were, the corrupt judge being led away in disgrace. Once the initial shock wore off, reality began to sink in. People turned to look at Karoline, some nodding approvingly, others staring with a mix of awe and curiosity. Word spread quickly that evidence tying Judge Hawthorne to illegal activities had surfaced thanks to her recent article. Reporters rushed to interview her, microphones thrust in her direction as questions flew at her from all sides. "How does it feel to see justice served?" one asked. "Were you expecting this outcome?" Another chimed in. Karoline answered, as best she could, keeping her responses measured and professional. Inside, however, she felt a mix of emotions: relief, pride, and a lingering sense of unease. This victory was significant, but she knew it wasn't the end of the fight. That evening, Karoline returned to her modest apartment, exhausted both physically and mentally. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from colleagues congratulating her, friends expressing admiration, and strangers sharing stories of how her work had inspired them. Yet amidst the praise, darker messages began to appear, anonymous threats warning her to stop digging or face dire consequences. Despite the intimidation, Karoline refused to let fear dictate her actions. Instead, she installed additional security measures around her home and vowed to continue pursuing the truth. After all, Judge Hawthorne's arrest was only the tip of the iceberg. There were still powerful individuals connected to his web of corruption who needed to be held accountable. Over the next few weeks, Karoline threw herself into her work with renewed determination. She reached out to whistleblowers, analyzed leaked documents, and pieced together information that painted a clearer picture of the corruption network. Each new discovery fueled her resolve, pushing her to dig deeper. Her follow-up articles exposed not only Judge Hawthorne's accomplices, but also the politicians and businessmen who benefited from their illicit dealings. Arrests followed, sending shockwaves through the city's elite circles. With each revelation, public support for Karoline grew stronger, and she became a symbol of integrity and accountability. Despite her growing fame, Karoline remained grounded. She reminded herself daily why she had chosen this path: to give a voice to those who couldn't fight back against injustice. Yet the journey wasn't without risks. Threats continued to pour in, forcing her to constantly adapt and stay vigilant. Still, she embraced these challenges as part of her mission. Every obstacle only strengthened her resolve to shine a light on the darkest corners of society. For Karoline, journalism wasn't just a career, it was a calling, a way to make the world a little less unfair, one story at a time. In the months that followed, Karoline's impact extended far beyond her city. National news outlets picked up her stories, amplifying her message and inspiring others to demand transparency and accountability. While danger lingered, she refused to let it silence her. Instead, she used it as motivation to keep going, knowing that each word she wrote had the potential to spark change. What started as a single exposé had grown into a movement, proving the courage and perseverance could dismantle even the most entrenched systems of corruption. And so, Karoline's story became more than just hers. It became a beacon of hope for anyone fighting for truth and justice. The days following Judge Hawthorne's arrest were a whirlwind for Karoline Leavitt. Her phone buzzed nonstop with calls and messages from people she knew and strangers alike. Some praised her courage, while others sought advice on how to expose corruption in their own communities. Reporters bombarded her with requests for interviews, and social media lit up with hashtags celebrating her work. Despite the attention, Karoline couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. She knew that taking down one corrupt judge wouldn't dismantle the entire system. Powerful people still operated in the shadows, and they wouldn't let her success go unchallenged. One evening, as she sat at her cluttered desk reviewing documents, her phone pinged with yet another anonymous message. This one was more direct than the others. "You've made enemies you can't imagine. Stop now or regret it." The word sent a shiver down her spine, but instead of backing off, Karoline felt a surge of defiance. She had faced threats before, and each time, they only reinforced her determination to keep going. She forwarded the message to her lawyer and security team, then locked her apartment doors, double-checking every window. Safety was important, but so was staying focused on her mission. Giving up wasn't an option, not when there were still truths waiting to be uncovered. Karoline's next target was a group of influential businessmen tied to Judge Hawthorne's bribery schemes. These men weren't just wealthy. They were deeply connected, wielding power through political donations, media ownership, and backdoor deals. Exposing them would be far riskier than going after a single judge, but Karoline believed it was necessary. She spent long hours poring over financial records, cross-referencing bank statements and interviewing sources who were willing to speak, but only if their identities remained hidden. The deeper she dug, the more she realized how vast and intricate the network truly was. It stretched across industries and even state lines, implicating individuals whose names appeared regularly in headlines. As her investigation progressed, Karoline began receiving strange visits. A man claiming to be a utility worker showed up at her building late at night, asking questions about her apartment. Another time, she noticed a car parked outside her place for hours, its occupants watching her every move. Though unsettling, these incidents didn't deter her. Instead, she documented everything, taking photos, jotting down license plate numbers, and reporting suspicious activity to local authorities. Her security team advised her to lay low for a while, but Karoline refused. If anything, these attempts to intimidate her only fueled her resolve to finish what she had started. Her breakthrough came unexpectedly during a routine coffee shop meeting with an old colleague. The woman, Sarah, had recently left her job at a prominent law firm after witnessing unethical practices firsthand. Over steaming cups of coffee, Sarah revealed details about secret meetings between top executives and politicians, where decisions were made behind closed doors without public scrutiny. One name kept coming up repeatedly, a billionaire real estate tycoon named Victor Langston. According to Sarah, Langston was the puppet master pulling strings in Judge Hawthorne's operation, ensuring favorable rulings and lucrative contracts for his allies. Karoline listened intently, her mind racing with possibilities. If she could prove Langston's involvement, it would blow the case wide open. Armed with new leads, Karoline dove into researching Victor Langston's empire. What she discovered was staggering. His company had secured massive development projects under questionable circumstances, often bypassing environmental regulations and displacing local communities. Public records showed a pattern of cozy relationships with government officials, including hefty campaign contributions and private dinners. But the most damning evidence came from internal emails leaked by a disgruntled former employee. These emails detailed explicit instructions to smooth things over with judges and regulators, using whatever means necessary. Karoline meticulously pieced together the puzzle, ensuring every fact was airtight before publishing anything. When her exposé finally hit the press, it caused an uproar. Headlines screamed about the billionaire's alleged crimes, and protests erupted outside his corporate headquarters. Law enforcement launched investigations, seizing documents and freezing assets linked to Langston's businesses. For the first time, the public saw the full extent of the corruption that had been festering beneath the surface. Yet amidst the chaos, Karoline remained cautious. She knew that exposing Langston wouldn't end the fight. There were still others, like him, powerful figures operating in secrecy, protected by layers of privilege and influence. Despite the backlash, Karoline continued to receive support from unexpected quarters. A retired detective reached out to share confidential files he had saved during his career, believing they could help her connect more dots. A whistleblower from a major corporation provided access to encrypted communications revealing further wrongdoing. Even ordinary citizens stepped forward, sharing personal stories of how corruption had affected their lives. Each piece of information strengthened Karoline's resolve, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this battle. Together they formed a coalition of truth-seekers, determined to hold the powerful accountable. But the pressure took its toll. Sleepless nights became the norm, and the constant vigilance required to stay safe left her mentally drained. Friends urged her to take a break, warning that burnout could derail her efforts. Karoline appreciated their concern but couldn't bring herself to slow down. Every day felt like a race against time, knowing that those implicated might find ways to cover their tracks or retaliate. Still, she found solace in small victories, letters from readers thanking her for giving them hope, or seeing reforms implemented based on her reports. These moments reminded her why she had chosen this path in the first place. One particularly tense moment occurred when Karoline received a package containing disturbing images of her daily routines, photos of her walking to work, shopping at the grocery store, even sitting on her balcony reading. Accompanying the pictures was a note, "We're always watching." The message chilled her to the bone, but she refused to let fear dictate her actions. She immediately contacted her security team, who upgraded her protective measures and installed surveillance cameras around her apartment. They also alerted law enforcement, though tracking down the sender proved difficult. Despite the heightened threat, Karoline pressed on, driven by a sense of duty to the countless victims of corruption. Her persistence paid off when prosecutors announced charges against several high-ranking officials tied to Langston's network. The arrests sent shockwaves through the city, prompting calls for systemic reform. Politicians scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal, while activists rallied for stricter oversight and transparency laws. Karoline's work had ignited a movement, empowering citizens to demand accountability from their leaders. Yet she remained humble, crediting her success to the collective effort of whistleblowers, investigators, and supporters who stood by her side. Even as the dust settled, Karoline knew the fight was far from over. Corruption thrived in silence and secrecy, and breaking that cycle required relentless vigilance. She vowed to continue shining a light on injustice, no matter how daunting the task. Her journey had transformed her, from a young journalist seeking answers to a symbol of resistance against entrenched power. And though danger loomed large, she embraced it as part of her calling. After all, the pursuit of truth was never easy, but it was always worth it. As weeks turned into months, Karoline Leavitt found herself at the center of a storm that showed no signs of calming. Her exposés had not only dismantled Judge Hawthorne's corrupt empire, but also unraveled a vast network of deceit involving powerful businessmen, politicians, and even law enforcement officials. The public reaction was overwhelming. Protests erupted in the streets, demanding accountability, while online petitions calling for systemic reforms gained millions of signatures. Yet, amidst the chaos, Karoline couldn't ignore the growing sense of isolation. Friends who once admired her courage now urged her to step back, warning her that she was risking too much. "You've done enough," one close friend told her, over coffee. "Isn't it time to let others take the lead?" But stepping back wasn't an option for Karoline. She knew all too well that corruption thrived when attention waned. While arrests had been made and headlines faded, those implicated were already working behind the scenes to rebuild their networks. Lawyers argued for leniency, lobbyists pushed for pardons, and wealthy defendants poured money into campaigns aimed at discrediting her work. Anonymous trolls flooded social media with baseless accusations, claiming she fabricated evidence or acted out of personal vendettas. Some even questioned her motives, suggesting she sought fame rather than justice. Despite the noise, Karoline remained steadfast, focusing on what mattered most: uncovering the truth. Her next target was a shadowy organization known only as the Consortium. It sounded like something out of a thriller novel, but its existence was chillingly real. According to leaked documents and whistleblower testimonies, the Consortium operated as a secret cabal of elites who manipulated policies and decisions to benefit themselves. Members included corporate executives, influential politicians, and members of organized crime. Their reach extended across industries, from finance and real estate to healthcare and education, and they used intimidation, bribery, and blackmail to maintain control. Proving their involvement would be nearly impossible without solid evidence, but Karoline was determined to try. To gather information, she adopted a new approach. Instead of relying solely on digital records, she began attending obscure community meetings and town halls where grievances about government mismanagement often surfaced. These gatherings attracted ordinary citizens frustrated by broken promises and unexplained delays in public projects. Listening to their stories gave Karoline valuable insights into how corruption trickled down to affect everyday lives. One elderly woman spoke tearfully about losing her home due to eminent domain laws abused by developers tied to the consortium. Another man described how his small business collapsed after being denied permits despite meeting all requirements. Each account added another layer to the web of injustice Karoline was trying to untangle. Karoline's persistence caught the eye of an unlikely ally, a former insider named Marcus Reed. Once a trusted advisor to Victor Langston, Marcus had grown disillusioned with the unethical practices he witnessed daily. After leaving the company under mysterious circumstances, he approached Karoline with a flash drive containing years' worth of incriminating data. The files revealed detailed plans for rigging elections, suppressing dissent, and exploiting loopholes in regulatory systems. For Marcus, sharing this information came at great personal risk. If discovered, he could face retaliation from his former associates. But like Karoline, he believed the cost of silence was far greater than the danger of speaking out. With Marcus's help, Karoline pieced together a damning narrative exposing the consortium's operations. She worked tirelessly, cross-referencing documents, verifying facts, and consulting experts to ensure accuracy. The process was exhausting, often requiring her to pull all-nighters fueled by coffee and sheer determination. Yet, every revelation brought her closer to her goal. When she finally published her findings, the response was explosive. News outlets around the world picked up the story, amplifying her message and shining a spotlight on the pervasive corruption plaguing society. Protesters marched in major cities holding placards bearing slogans like "No more secrets" and "Justice for all." However, not everyone welcomed the exposure. Powerful figures implicated in the scandal launched smear campaigns against Karoline, accusing her of exaggerating facts and fabricating connections. Some hired private investigators to dig into her past, hoping to find dirt that could discredit her. Others attempted to bribe her sources, offering them large sums of money to retract their statements. Through it all, Karoline stood firm, refusing to be swayed by threats or bribes. She leaned on her support network, a tight-knit group of colleagues, friends and activists who believed in her mission. Together they weathered the storm, countering false narratives with hard evidence and unwavering resolve. Despite the challenges, Karoline's efforts yielded tangible results. Lawmakers introduced bills aimed at increasing transparency and accountability in government dealings. Independent oversight committees were formed to monitor decision-making processes and investigate allegations of misconduct. Public trust in institutions slowly began to rebuild, thanks in part to Karoline's relentless pursuit of justice. Yet she understood that change wouldn't happen overnight. Rooting out deeply entrenched corruption required sustained effort and vigilance, a lesson she learned firsthand through her struggles. One evening, as she reviewed notes for her next article, Karoline received a call from an unknown number. On the other end was a soft-spoken woman identifying herself as Claire Bennett. Claire claimed to represent a group of whistleblowers eager to share crucial information about the consortium's international activities. Intrigued, Karoline agreed to meet her at a neutral location, a quiet cafe tucked away in a suburban neighborhood. The encounter proved fruitful, as Claire provided access to encrypted files detailing offshore accounts, shell companies, and illicit transactions spanning multiple countries. With this new evidence, Karoline expanded her investigation beyond domestic borders, shining a light on global corruption networks. As her work gained international recognition, Karoline became a symbol of hope for marginalized communities worldwide. People reached out to her from distant corners of the globe, sharing stories of oppression and seeking guidance on how to fight back. She responded to each message personally, offering advice and encouragement whenever possible. Though she couldn't solve every problem, she made it her mission to amplify voices often ignored by mainstream media. In doing so, she inspired countless individuals to stand up for their rights and demand justice. Yet, the journey exacted a heavy toll. Sleep deprivation, constant stress, and the ever-present threat of retaliation weighed heavily on Karoline. Dark circles formed under her eyes, and her once carefree laugh grew rare. Still, she refused to give up, drawing strength from the knowledge that her work mattered. Every article she wrote, every interview she conducted, and every source she protected contributed to a larger movement, a collective push toward fairness and equality. And though the road ahead remained fraught with obstacles, Karoline embraced them as part of her calling. After all, the pursuit of truth wasn't just a job, it was a lifelong commitment. The stakes continued to rise for Karoline Leavitt as her investigation into the consortium expanded beyond national borders. What began as a local exposé had now grown into an international crusade, drawing attention from governments, activists, and even intelligence agencies. Each revelation brought more scrutiny, not just on those implicated, but also on Karoline herself. She became both a hero and a target, celebrated by some and vilified by others. Her name appeared in headlines worldwide, often accompanied by polarizing opinions. Some hailed her as a modern-day whistleblower, while critics dismissed her as reckless or overly ambitious. Yet none of this deterred her. If anything, the mounting pressure only deepened her resolve to keep digging.
One of the most significant breakthroughs came when Claire Bennett, the whistleblower who had contacted Karoline weeks earlier, introduced her to a network of insiders operating within the consortium's global operations. These individuals risked
their lives to provide evidence of offshore accounts used to launder money, secret meetings held in luxury resorts, and agreements signed under pseudonyms to avoid detection. The documents they shared painted a chilling picture of how wealth and power were concentrated in the hands of a few at the expense of millions. For Karoline, handling such sensitive material required extreme caution. She encrypted every file, stored backups in secure locations, and communicated with her sources using untraceable methods. Even then, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone might be watching her every move. As Karoline prepared to publish her findings, she noticed subtle changes around her. A black SUV parked outside her apartment building for hours, its occupants never stepping out. Strange clicks on her phone line hinted at possible wiretapping. Delivery drivers arrived with packages addressed to names she didn't recognize. None of these incidents could be definitively linked to foul play, but taken together, they created an atmosphere of unease. Her security team advised her to relocate temporarily, suggesting safe houses where she could continue working without fear of surveillance. Reluctantly, Karoline agreed, packing only essentials before moving to a nondescript suburban home miles away from the city. Despite the precautions, the threats escalated. One night, as she sat hunched over her laptop reviewing documents, a loud crash startled her. Rushing to the window, she saw shattered glass scattered across the driveway below. Someone had thrown a brick through her living room window, leaving behind a note scrawled in jagged handwriting. "Back off, or worse will happen." Shaken, but undeterred, Karoline called the police and reported the incident. Officers arrived quickly, dusting the scene for fingerprints and promising to increase patrols in the area. But Karoline knew better than to rely solely on law enforcement. She installed additional cameras, reinforced locks, and kept pepper spray close at hand. Danger lurked everywhere, but so did her determination to expose the truth. Her next article sent shockwaves across continents. Titled "Shadows Across Borders," it detailed how the consortium manipulated economies, exploited labor forces, and evaded taxes by funneling billions through shell companies registered in tax havens. The piece included damning evidence, emails, between executives planning illegal mergers, invoices showing payments to ghost employees, and photographs of clandestine gatherings disguised as charity events. Within hours of publication, protests erupted in major cities worldwide. Activists demanded immediate action, calling for investigations into banks, corporations, and government officials complicit in enabling such schemes. Lawmakers scrambled to respond, introducing legislation aimed at closing loopholes and increasing financial transparency. The backlash was swift and fierce. Corporate lawyers issued statements denying involvement, labeling Karoline's report as speculative and baseless. Public relations firms launched campaigns to discredit her work, spreading misinformation online and pressuring news outlets to retract parts of her story. Some journalists, fearful of retaliation, distanced themselves from her, refusing to collaborate or cite her articles. Even friends expressed concern, urging her to tone down her rhetoric lest she attract even more hostility. But Karoline refused to soften her stance. She understood that exposing corruption meant challenging powerful interests, and those interests would stop at nothing to protect themselves. Amidst the chaos, unexpected allies emerged. Whistleblowers from industries unrelated to the consortium reached out, offering insights into similar practices elsewhere. Environmental activists highlighted how corporate greed contributed to climate disasters, citing examples of polluted rivers and deforested lands resulting from unchecked exploitation. Human rights advocates connected her work to broader struggles against inequality and oppression, emphasizing how corruption disproportionately affected marginalized communities. Together, they formed a coalition united by a shared vision of accountability and justice. For Karoline, this solidarity was a source of strength, reminding her that she wasn't fighting alone. Yet the emotional toll of her work grew heavier with each passing day. Sleep eluded her, plagued by nightmares of being followed or attacked. Meals became sporadic, skipped whenever deadlines loomed or new leads surfaced. Friends noticed the change. A once vibrant woman now looked pale and exhausted, her laughter replaced by a quiet intensity. Concerned colleagues urged her to take breaks, if only briefly, to recharge. "You can't pour from an empty cup," one mentor told her gently. Though grateful for their care, Karoline struggled to step away. Every moment felt critical, every lead potentially groundbreaking. Rest felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. To cope, Karoline found solace in small rituals. Morning runs helped clear her mind, while evenings spent journaling allowed her to process emotions too raw to share aloud. Music played softly in the background as she worked late into the night, providing a sense of comfort amid the chaos. Occasionally, she visited a nearby park, sitting quietly by the lake to watch birds glide across the water. Nature reminded her of life's beauty, a stark contrast to the ugliness she confronted daily. These moments of peace, though fleeting, grounded her and renewed her focus. Her persistence paid off when authorities announced arrests in several countries tied to the consortium's activities. Executives, politicians, and enablers were detained, their assets frozen pending trial. Citizens cheered the developments, celebrating what seemed like a rare victory against entrenched power. Yet, Karoline remained cautious. Arrests didn't guarantee convictions, and legal battles could drag on for years. Moreover, many key players still operated freely, shielded by layers of privilege and influence. She vowed to stay vigilant, continuing to gather evidence and hold wrongdoers accountable. In the midst of her relentless pursuit, Karoline received an invitation to speak at a global summit on ethics and governance. Organizers praised her courage and invited her to share insights into investigative journalism and combating corruption. Initially hesitant, she accepted, seeing it as an opportunity to inspire others to join the fight. Standing before a packed auditorium, she spoke passionately about the importance of truth-telling and the role of ordinary citizens in holding power accountable. Her words resonated deeply, earning standing ovations and sparking conversations long after the event ended. Returning home, Karoline reflected on how far she'd come. From a young journalist chasing stories to a global advocate for transparency, her journey had transformed not only her life but countless others. Still, she knew the road ahead remained fraught with challenges. Corruption adapted, finding new ways to survive despite exposure. But Karoline embraced the struggle, knowing that her work mattered, not just for today, but for generations to come. And so, she pressed on, fueled by hope, resilience, and an unshakable belief in the power of truth. The global summit marked a turning point for Karoline Leavitt, but it also brought new challenges she hadn't anticipated. While her speech inspired many, it also drew the attention of powerful adversaries who saw her as a direct threat to their interests. Within days of returning home, Karoline noticed an uptick in suspicious activity around her. Unmarked cars lingering near her safe house, unfamiliar faces appearing in places she frequented, and cryptic messages flooding her inbox. One email stood out. "You've made yourself too big to ignore. Be careful." Though vague, its tone was unmistakably menacing. Instead of retreating, Karoline doubled down on her efforts, determined not to let fear dictate her actions. Her next investigation focused on how the consortium exploited natural disasters for profit. A grim revelation uncovered through documents provided by a whistleblower working in disaster relief. According to the files, the consortium manipulated aid distribution systems, diverting funds meant for victims into private accounts while leaving affected communities without essential resources. In one instance, millions earmarked for rebuilding, after a devastating hurricane disappeared into offshore banks controlled by consortium members. Families displaced by the storm were left homeless, forced to rely on makeshift shelters long after promises of assistance had been made. The scale of betrayal shocked even Karoline, who thought she'd grown immune to such horrors. Determined to expose this exploitation, Karoline spent weeks traveling to regions impacted by recent disasters. She interviewed survivors living in squalid conditions, heard stories of empty promises from officials, and documented crumbling infrastructure that should have been repaired months ago. Each conversation reinforced her belief that corruption wasn't just about money. It was about human lives destroyed and futures stolen. Her notes filled with names, dates, and locations, painting a picture of systemic neglect fueled by greed. Back at her safe house, she pieced together the evidence, ensuring every claim could be substantiated before publishing anything. When her article titled, "Profiting from Pain" hit the presses, it sparked outrage worldwide. Protesters gathered outside government buildings demanding investigations into aid mismanagement. Non-profit organizations called for reforms to ensure transparency in disaster response efforts. Even celebrities joined the outcry, using their platforms to amplify Karoline's message. Yet amidst the public fury, backlash from those implicated intensified. Lawyers representing consortium-linked entities threatened legal action, accusing Karoline of defamation and fabricating evidence. Corporate lobbyists pressured advertisers to pull funding from outlets publishing her work. Despite these attempts to silence her, Karoline remained undeterred, standing firm behind her reporting. Her resilience earned her both allies and enemies. Among the former was Detective Laura Hayes, a seasoned investigator assigned to cases involving financial crimes. Laura reached out after reading Karoline's exposé, offering access to classified police reports detailing similar patterns of fraud during past disasters. Their collaboration proved invaluable, combining Karoline's investigative skills with Laura's institutional knowledge to build stronger cases against perpetrators. Together, they identified key players orchestrating the schemes and mapped out connections between them. For Karoline, working alongside someone like Laura felt validating, a reminder that justice required teamwork, not solitary heroics. However, the partnership also attracted unwanted attention. One evening, as Karoline and Laura met discreetly in a quiet cafe to discuss their findings, they noticed two men seated nearby, pretending to read newspapers but glancing repeatedly in their direction. Sensing danger, Laura suggested relocating to a more secure location. They quickly packed up their materials and left separately, taking different routes to avoid being followed. Later that night, Karoline reviewed security footage from the cafe's cameras, confirming her suspicions. The men had indeed been tailing them. It was a chilling reminder that their work carried risks far beyond professional criticism. Undeterred, Karoline pressed forward, expanding her focus to include environmental destruction caused by corporate greed. A tip from an anonymous source led her to a remote mining site where toxic waste had leaked into nearby rivers, poisoning local water supplies. Residents reported illnesses ranging from skin rashes to respiratory problems, yet no action had been taken despite repeated complaints. Digging deeper, Karoline discovered that the company responsible was linked to the consortium, operating under lax regulations secured through bribes. She visited the area herself, speaking with villagers whose livelihoods depended on clean water and fertile land now rendered unusable. Her report on the mining disaster struck a chord with readers, sparking debates about corporate responsibility and environmental protection. Activists organized protests outside the company's headquarters, urging boycotts of its products. Scientists weighed in, providing data linking pollution levels to health issues among residents. Policymakers introduced legislation aimed at tightening oversight of industrial activities. But for Karoline, the most rewarding outcome was seeing communities come together to demand change. Villagers who once felt powerless realized they weren't alone, joining forces with advocates across the country to fight for justice. Yet triumph came at a cost. The same week her article appeared, Karoline received news that one of her key sources had gone missing. The whistleblower, a young engineer named Ethan, had provided critical information about the mining operation's safety violations. His disappearance sent shockwaves through her network, raising fears that he might have been targeted for speaking out. Karoline worked tirelessly to track him down, reaching out to contacts in law enforcement and human rights organizations. Days later, Ethan resurfaced, having fled to a neighboring country to escape threats against his life. Though relieved, Karoline couldn't shake the guilt of putting him in harm's way. Amidst the chaos, personal sacrifices mounted. Friendships strained under the weight of her relentless schedule. Some drifted away entirely, unable to understand why she prioritized her mission over downtime. Family gatherings became rare occasions, with relatives expressing concern about her well-being. Even moments of joy felt fleeting, overshadowed by the constant pressure of deadlines and dangers. Still, Karoline found solace in small victories. A heartfelt thank you note from a survivor she'd interviewed, a child's smile during a community event she helped organize. These reminders of humanity kept her grounded when despair threatened to overwhelm her. Her determination caught the eye of international organizations dedicated to fighting corruption. Representatives from groups like Transparency International and Amnesty International invited her to collaborate on initiatives aimed at promoting accountability and protecting whistleblowers. Working with these organizations gave Karoline access to resources and expertise she couldn't have obtained alone. They helped secure funding for independent investigations, trained activists in digital security, and advocated for policy changes at the highest levels. For the first time, Karoline felt part of something larger than herself, a global movement united by a shared commitment to justice. But the battle wasn't won yet. Powerful figures implicated in her exposés continued to evade consequences, shielded by wealth and influence. Legal proceedings dragged on, bogged down by technicalities and appeals. Public interest waned as headlines shifted to newer scandals, leaving unfinished business unresolved. Karoline understood that dismantling corruption required sustained effort, not just bursts of outrage. She vowed to stay vigilant, continuing to shine a light on wrongdoing wherever it occurred. As months passed, Karoline's reputation solidified as a force for good in a world riddled with injustice. Award ceremonies celebrated her courage. Academics studied her methods, and aspiring journalists sought her mentorship. Yet recognition mattered little compared to the impact of her work. Every story she told, every voice she amplified contributed to a broader shift toward transparency and accountability. And though danger still loomed large, Karoline embraced it as part of her calling. After all, the pursuit of truth wasn't just a career. It was a lifelong mission driven by hope, resilience, and an unshakable belief in the power of collective action. As Karoline Leavitt's influence grew, so did the complexity of her challenges. The consortium, though weakened by her relentless exposés, was far from defeated. Its remaining members adapted, employing subtler tactics to evade detection while continuing their exploitative practices. Whistleblowers who dared to speak out faced escalating threats. Some were harassed, others blacklisted, and a few simply vanished without a trace. Karoline felt the weight of responsibility for those who risked everything to share information with her. She knew she couldn't protect everyone, but she vowed to honor their bravery by ensuring their voices reached the world. One evening, as she sifted through encrypted files sent by an anonymous source, Karoline stumbled upon something extraordinary, a blueprint for a secret initiative called Project Phoenix. According to the documents, this project aimed to rebuild the consortium's operations under a new guise, leveraging emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and blockchain to conceal illegal activities. It detailed plans to infiltrate industries ranging from healthcare to renewable energy, positioning themselves as pioneers in innovation, while covertly siphoning resources and manipulating markets. The revelation chilled her to the bone. If successful, Project Phoenix could render all her previous efforts meaningless, allowing corruption to thrive unchecked in the digital age. Determined to stop them, Karoline assembled a team of trusted allies: Detective Laura Hayes, tech experts skilled in cybersecurity, and legal advisors familiar with corporate fraud cases. Together, they devised a strategy to expose Project Phoenix before it gained traction. Their first step involved tracing the origins of the leaked documents, hoping to identify the whistleblower and gather additional evidence. This process required navigating a labyrinth of encrypted servers, hidden IP addresses, and shadowy online forums where criminals often congregated. Each lead brought them closer to unraveling the conspiracy, but also deeper into perilous territory. The stakes rose dramatically when one of their tech experts, a young programmer named Ryan, detected unusual activity on his personal devices. Someone had breached his system, planting malware designed to monitor keystrokes and extract sensitive data. Realizing they'd been compromised, the team immediately shut down their operations, relocating to a secure facility equipped with advanced counter-surveillance measures. For days, they worked in isolation, analyzing the breach and fortifying their defenses. Despite the setback, Karoline refused to abandon the investigation. Instead, she saw it as proof that they were onto something big, something the consortium desperately wanted to keep hidden. Their breakthrough came unexpectedly during a routine sweep of financial records. Buried within layers of seemingly innocuous transactions was a pattern linking several high-profile companies to offshore accounts controlled by Project Phoenix operatives. These companies, though unrelated on the surface, shared board members and investors tied to the consortium's inner circle. By connecting the dots, Karoline uncovered a sophisticated network designed to launder money and fund illicit ventures under the cover of legitimate business dealings. The discovery provided the smoking gun they needed to expose the conspiracy publicly. When Karoline published her findings in a bombshell article titled "The New Face of Corruption," the response was explosive. Readers around the globe expressed outrage at how technology, often heralded as a tool for progress, was being weaponized to perpetuate injustice. Tech watchdog groups demanded stricter regulations on AI and blockchain applications, warning of their potential misuse. Investors pulled funding from implicated companies, sending stock prices plummeting. Lawmakers introduced legislation aimed at increasing transparency in emerging industries, citing Karoline's report as a wake-up call. Yet amidst the public outcry, backlash from those implicated intensified. Corporate lawyers launched aggressive campaigns to discredit Karoline's work, filing lawsuits alleging defamation and invasion of privacy. Public relations firms spread misinformation online, attempting to cast doubt on her credibility. Anonymous trolls flooded social media with baseless accusations, targeting not just Karoline, but also her colleagues and sources. Despite the onslaught, Karoline remained resolute, countering falsehoods with hard evidence and unwavering determination. Her supporters rallied behind her, amplifying her message and defending her integrity against smear tactics. Amidst the chaos, unexpected heroes emerged. A former employee of one of the implicated companies contacted Karoline, offering insider knowledge about Project Phoenix's operations. Another whistleblower, fearing retaliation, entrusted her with classified emails detailing top-secret meetings between executives and government officials. Each contribution strengthened her case, providing irrefutable proof of wrongdoing. For Karoline, these acts of courage served as reminders that even in the darkest times, there were people willing to stand up for what was right. Yet, the emotional toll of her work continued to mount. Long hours spent poring over documents left her physically drained while constant vigilance against threats wore her down mentally. Friends urged her to take breaks, reminding her that burnout wouldn't help anyone. Family members pleaded with her to prioritize her safety, worried that she was sacrificing too much for the cause. Karoline appreciated their concern, but struggled to step away. Every moment felt critical, every lead potentially groundbreaking. Rest felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. To cope, Karoline leaned on small rituals that brought her comfort. Morning jogs cleared her mind, while evenings spent cooking simple meals provided a sense of normalcy. Music played softly in the background as she worked late into the night, a soothing counterpoint to the stress of deadlines. Occasionally, she visited a quiet park near her safe house, sitting on a bench to watch children play and families laugh. These moments of peace, though fleeting, reminded her why she fought so hard, to create a better future for generations to come. Her persistence paid off when authorities announced arrests linked to Project Phoenix. Executives, engineers, and lobbyists involved in the scheme were detained, their assets frozen pending trial. Citizens celebrated the developments, hopeful that justice might finally prevail. Yet Karoline remained cautious. Arrests didn't guarantee convictions, and legal battles could drag on for years. Moreover, many key players still operated freely, shielded by layers of privilege and influence. She vowed to stay vigilant, continuing to gather evidence and hold wrongdoers accountable. In the midst of her relentless pursuit, Karoline received an invitation to address the United Nations General Assembly. Organizers praised her courage and invited her to share insights into combating modern corruption. Initially hesitant, she accepted, seeing it as an opportunity to inspire global action. Standing before world leaders, she spoke passionately about the importance of accountability and the role of technology in shaping ethical governance. Her words resonated deeply, earning standing ovations and sparking discussions long after the event ended. Returning home, Karoline reflected on how far she'd come. From a young journalist chasing stories to a global advocate for transparency, her journey had transformed not only her life but countless others. Still, she knew the road ahead remained fraught with challenges. Corruption adapted, finding new ways to survive despite exposure. But Karoline embraced the struggle, knowing that her work mattered not just for today but for generations to come. And so she pressed on, fueled by hope, resilience, and an unshakable belief in the power of truth. Though danger loomed large, Karoline found strength in the growing movement she had helped ignite. Ordinary citizens inspired by her work began organizing grassroots campaigns, demanding reforms, and holding leaders accountable. Journalists adopted her methods, uncovering injustices in their own communities. Activists collaborated across borders, sharing strategies and resources to combat corruption wherever it occurred. For Karoline, this collective effort represented the true measure of success, not accolades or recognition, but the empowerment of others to fight for justice. And yet, she understood that the battle would never truly end. As long as power existed, there would always be those who sought to abuse it. But Karoline refused to let cynicism overshadow her optimism. She believed in the possibility of change, no matter how daunting the odds. With each story she told, each voice she amplified, she moved closer to a world where truth prevailed over deceit, where accountability replaced impunity, and where justice became accessible to all. It was a vision worth fighting for, one she intended to pursue until her last breath. Karoline Leavitt's journey reached a pivotal moment when her address at the United Nations sparked a global wave of activism. Her words resonated deeply with people from all walks of life, igniting conversations about corruption and accountability in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. Ordinary citizens began organizing protests, demanding transparency not just from their governments, but also from corporations and institutions that shaped their daily lives. Social media buzzed with hashtags like Tartan Truth Matters and Unnoted Corruption, amplifying voices that had long been ignored. For Karoline, seeing this groundswell of support was both humbling and empowering, a testament to the power of collective action. Yet, even as momentum grew, so did resistance. Powerful figures implicated in her exposés redoubled their efforts to discredit her work. Lobbyists launched campaigns to sway public opinion, framing her investigations as attacks on economic growth or national security. Some critics argued that exposing corporate secrets undermined innovation, while others claimed her reports jeopardized diplomatic relations. Despite these attempts to paint her as reckless or divisive, Karoline remained steadfast. She understood that challenging entrenched power structures would always provoke pushback, but it was precisely this resistance that underscored the importance of her mission. Her next investigation took her into uncharted territory, the intersection of technology, surveillance, and civil liberties. A whistleblower reached out with evidence showing how certain tech companies collaborated with authoritarian regimes to develop tools for mass surveillance. These tools were marketed as solutions for crime prevention, but were instead used to suppress dissent, monitor activists, and violate privacy rights. The whistleblower, a former engineer named Priya, risked everything to share internal memos, design blueprints, and client lists detailing these partnerships. Karoline knew the stakes were high. Exposing such practices could lead to severe repercussions, not only for herself but also for Priya and countless others caught in the crossfire. To protect her source, Karoline worked tirelessly to anonymize the data before publishing anything. She consulted cybersecurity experts to ensure the documents couldn't be traced back to Priya, encrypting files and scrubbing metadata. Meanwhile, she traveled discreetly to meet with human rights organizations and legal advocates who specialized in digital freedom. Together, they developed a strategy to release the information responsibly, balancing the need for transparency with concerns for safety. It was a delicate dance, requiring precision and patience, but Karoline believed it was worth every painstaking effort. When her article titled "Silent Watchers" went live, it sent shockwaves across industries and governments alike. Readers were outraged to learn how advanced technologies were being weaponized against innocent civilians. Tech workers staged walkouts at implicated companies, demanding ethical reforms. Privacy advocates called for stricter regulations on data, collection, and surveillance practices. Lawmakers proposed legislation aimed at holding tech firms accountable for misuse of their products. Yet, amidst the uproar, backlash from those implicated intensified. Corporate executives denied wrongdoing, accusing Karoline of cherry-picking facts and misrepresenting their intentions. Public relations teams flooded media outlets with counter-narratives, attempting to downplay the severity of the revelations. Despite the hostile environment, Karoline found solace in unexpected places. Letters poured in from individuals whose lives had been impacted by unchecked surveillance, activists targeted for speaking out, journalists harassed for reporting the truth, families torn apart by wrongful accusations based on flawed algorithms. Each story reinforced her belief that her work mattered, not just as journalism but as advocacy for human dignity and freedom. She responded to each message personally, offering encouragement and vowing to keep fighting alongside them. As weeks turned into months, Karoline's focus shifted toward building sustainable systems of accountability, recognizing that individual exposés, no matter how impactful, couldn't dismantle corruption alone. She began collaborating with policymakers, academics, and grassroots organizers to create frameworks for lasting change. They drafted proposals for independent oversight bodies tasked with monitoring corporate behavior and ensuring compliance with ethical standards. They advocated for whistleblower protections, arguing that safeguarding courageous insiders was essential for uncovering hidden truths. And they pushed for educational initiatives to raise awareness about the dangers of unchecked power. Her efforts earned her invitations to speak at prestigious forums worldwide, from universities to think tanks to international summits. Each appearance gave her an opportunity to inspire new audiences, encouraging them to question authority and demand justice. She shared stories of resilience, highlighting the courage of whistleblowers, activists, and ordinary citizens who refused to stay silent in the face of injustice. Her speeches often ended with a call to action. Change begins with you. Speak up, stand firm. Together, we can build a better future. But behind the scenes, Karoline faced mounting personal challenges. The constant threat of retaliation weighed heavily on her, manifesting in sleepless nights and moments of doubt. Friends expressed concern about her well-being, urging her to take breaks and prioritize self-care. Family members begged her to reconsider her path, fearing for her safety. Though touched by their care, Karoline struggled to step away. Every setback felt temporary, every obstacle surmountable. She reminded herself daily why she had chosen this fight, not for fame or recognition, but because someone had to stand up for those without a voice. Her resolve deepened further when she witnessed tangible results from her work. Authorities announced charges against key players implicated in her investigations, including executives involved in Project Phoenix and officials complicit in surveillance abuses. Courts froze assets tied to illicit activities, disrupting operations of corrupt networks. Citizens celebrated these victories, hopeful that justice might finally prevail. Yet Karoline remained cautious, knowing that arrests and convictions didn't guarantee systemic reform. She continued pushing for policy changes, understanding that true progress required structural transformation rather than isolated wins. Amidst the chaos, Karoline found strength in her growing network of allies. Journalists inspired by her methods began uncovering injustices in their own regions, creating a ripple effect of accountability. Activists collaborated across borders, sharing strategies and resources to combat corruption wherever it occurred. Even strangers approached her during public appearances, thanking her for giving them hope and pledging to join the fight. For Karoline, these connections represented the true measure of success, not accolades or awards, but the empowerment of others to seek justice. And yet she understood that the battle would never truly end. As long as power existed, there would always be those who sought to abuse it. But Karoline refused to let cynicism overshadow her optimism. She believed in the possibility of change, no matter how daunting the odds. With each story she told, each voice she amplified, she moved closer to a world where truth prevailed over deceit, where accountability replaced impunity, and where justice became accessible to all. It was a vision worth fighting for, one she intended to pursue until her last breath. Years later, Karoline reflected on her journey. What had started as a young journalist chasing stories had evolved into a lifelong commitment to exposing corruption and advocating for fairness. Along the way, she had faced threats, endured hardships, and sacrificed much. But she had also inspired countless others to stand up for what was right, proving that courage could spark change even in the darkest times. Her name became synonymous with integrity and resilience, a beacon of hope for anyone striving to make the world a little less unjust. Though danger still loomed large, Karoline embraced it as part of her calling. After all, the pursuit of truth wasn't just a career. It was a purpose, a responsibility, a promise to leave the world better than she found it. And so she pressed on, fueled by hope, determination, and an unwavering belief in the power of collective action. For Karoline, the fight was far from over, but neither was her resolve.